What makes someone a monster, and what makes them a man? And what happens when the line between them blurs in the rain-soaked concrete of an alley? For Clara, a 24-year-old barista drowning in debt, the world was simple. You keep your head down, you don't get involved, and you survive. But one night, that simple rule was broken by the sound of sickening thuds and a man's pained gasp. She witnessed a beating. She saw the most feared man in the city, Alessandro Salvatore, broken and left for dead. Every other person turned away. But Clara stepped forward. This is the story of the one woman who chose to see a man instead of a monster, and in doing so, changed the entire criminal underworld. The neon sign of the Morning Grind Cafe sputtered, casting a sickly pink glow on the wet pavement of the Tribeca alley. It was 2:17 a.m. Clara Bennett zipped up her thin jacket, the damp New York cold already seeping into her bones. This was the worst part of her day, the walk from the back door of the cafe to her tiny apartment 3 blocks over. It was a gauntlet of shadows and overflowing dumpsters, a limbo between her 2 exhausting jobs. Tonight, the city was uncharacteristically quiet, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from a rusty fire escape. That is, until she passed the service entrance of Veritas, one of the most exclusive and expensive restaurants in the city. The sounds were wrong. They weren't the usual clatter of plates or the yelling of chefs. It was the wet, heavy thwack of a fist hitting flesh, a low grunt of pain, choked off. Clara froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of, don't look, keep walking." She'd been raised on the city's unwritten laws. You hear something? You hear nothing. You see something? You see nothing. Getting involved was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. She pressed herself against the cold brick wall, trying to become invisible. Peeking around the corner of a massive green dumpster, she saw them. 3 men, dressed in dark, tailored suits, standing over a 4th man who was on his knees. The man on the ground was also in a suit, but his $5,000 Italian jacket was torn, his white shirt stained a horrifying, spreading crimson. "You thought you could make a deal with Petrov behind our backs, Alessandro," one of the attackers spat. He had a cruel, thin face and kicked the kneeling man in the stomach. The man, Alessandro, coughed, spraying blood on the pavement. He tried to look up, his face a mask of defiance, but another man struck him across the face with something hard, a set of brass knuckles. "This," the leader said, grabbing Alessandro by his hair and forcing his head up. "This is from Mr. Petrov. He owns this port now, and you're just a memory." Clara's breath hitched. She recognized that name. Alessandro Salvatore. Even a barista knew that name. He wasn't just a businessman. He was the businessman. The Salvatore family allegedly owned half the city's shipping, sanitation, and construction, and, according to whispered rumors, 100% of its fear. He was untouchable, or at least, he was supposed to be. A couple, laughing as they stumbled out of a nearby bar, turned the corner. They saw the scene, their laughter dying instantly. The man grabbed the woman's arm. "Oh my God," the woman whispered. The man pulled her back. "Don't look. Let's go now." They vanished back onto the main street. They saw. They did nothing. The attackers weren't finished. They were professional. This wasn't a mugging. It was an execution. They kicked him until he stopped moving, until he was just a heap of expensive cloth and broken bones. "He's done. Let's move," the leader said, wiping his knuckles on a handkerchief. They melted back into the shadows, disappearing into a black sedan that idled silently at the end of the alley. Silence returned, heavier this time, broken only by the rain and the faint, ragged breathing of the man on the ground. Clara was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Walk away, Clara. Walk away. This is not your business. He's a monster. He's a criminal. Let the monsters eat each other." She tried to move her feet. She willed them to take her home, to her lumpy mattress and the pile of final notice bills on her counter. But they wouldn't budge. She thought of her mother in the hospital bed, her breathing just as shallow and ragged in those final days. She remembered the doctors walking away the moment they decided she wasn't worth the fight anymore. No one deserves to die alone in the gutter. "Damn it," she whispered, the word a puff of steam in the cold air. Her feet moved, but not toward home. They moved toward the shadow crumpled by the dumpster. She dropped to her knees beside him, her cheap bag spilling onto the grimy concrete. "Hey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hey, can you hear me?" He was unconscious, his face already swelling, a deep gash bleeding profusely from his temple. He was drowning in his own blood. The old training kicked in. Clara hadn't just been a barista her whole life. She'd been 2 semesters shy of a nursing degree before her mother got sick, and the tuition money evaporated into a mountain of medical debt. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Okay, first things first." Her hands, usually shaking as she handed off lattes, were suddenly steady. She ripped off her own scarf and wadded it, pressing it hard against the gash on his temple. "Pressure," she muttered. "Gotta stop the bleeding." She gently rolled him onto his side, into the recovery position, clearing his airway. His breathing immediately became less of a gurgle. He was alive. For now. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers slick with a blood that wasn't hers. She dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "There's a man," Clara said, her voice a high-pitched, anonymous squeak. "He's been beaten. Badly. In the alley behind Veritas in Tribeca. He needs an ambulance. Now." "Ma'am, what's your name?" Clara hung up. She knew she should run. The sirens would come, and they would ask questions she couldn't answer. But she looked down at the man. Alessandro Salvatore. The boogeyman of the 5 boroughs. His hand, which probably signed death warrants, was lying palm up, open and vulnerable. She couldn't leave him. Not yet. She kept pressing the scarf to his head. "Stay with me," she whispered to the unconscious man. "You're a bastard, I'm sure. But you're not dying tonight. Not here." In that moment, his eyelids flickered. His dark eyes, unfocused and glazed with pain, found hers. He saw her. Just for a second, he saw a young woman with terrified brown eyes and a cheap jacket kneeling over him like some kind of gutter angel. Then he was gone again. Clara heard the distant wail of sirens. Her self-preservation finally screamed louder than her conscience. She pulled her scarf back. It was ruined, soaked. She stood up, backing away into the shadows. She ran the 3 blocks home, her heart pounding a new rhythm. "What have you done? What have you done? What have you done?" She bolted her door, threw her bloody jacket in the trash, and scrubbed her hands until they were raw. But she couldn't wash away the feeling of his blood, or the terrifying brief moment his eyes had met hers. She had just saved the life of New York's most dangerous man, and he had seen her face. Alessandro Salvatore did not wake up in a hospital. The sterile white rooms of New York Presbyterian were for civilians. He woke up in a place that didn't exist on any map, a high-tech private clinic buried in the sub-basement of one of his family's skyscrapers. He woke to the scent of antiseptic and the steady beep of a heart monitor. His first sensation was pain, a blinding, white-hot agony that started in his ribs and radiated everywhere. His second was fury. "He's awake." The voice was deep and calm. Leo Moretti, His right-hand man, his consigliere, stepped out of the shadows. Leo was a man who looked more like a college professor than a high-ranking mobster with greying temples and wire-rimmed glasses. "How long?" Alessandro's voice was a raw croak. 48 hours, Leo said, offering him a glass of water with a straw. Alessandro pushed it away, sitting up too fast. The world spun, and a groan of pain escaped him. 2 broken ribs, a fractured cheekbone, severe concussion, and 28 stitches, Leo reported, as if reading a grocery list. Petrov was thorough. Petrov! Alessandro breathed the name like a curse. He knew where I'd be. The dinner at Veritas. It was a setup. Yes, Leo said quietly. We have a rat, Alessandro. This was worse than the beating. Betrayal. An enemy outside was a problem. An enemy inside was a cancer. Who? Alessandro started, but Leo held up a hand. We are handling it. First, you heal. The family cannot show weakness. Alessandro stared at the pristine white ceiling. Weakness. He had been weak, left in an alley like common trash. The police? An anonymous 911 call. By the time our of-duty guys responded to the dispatch, the real ambulance was 10 minutes out. Our team collected you. The scene was clean by the time NYPD arrived. As far as the world knows, you are in Europe on business. Alessandro nodded. Leo was perfect, but something was itching at the edge of his memory, a fragment from the darkness. There was someone else, he whispered. After they left. Before your men. Leo's expression tightened. There were no witnesses, Alessandro. The street was empty. The couple from the bar ran. No, not a witness. Alessandro's hand went to his temple, where the stitches pulled at his skin. Someone helped me. They turned me onto my side. They put pressure on my head. He closed his eyes, trying to summon the image. A woman. Young. Scared eyes. Leo frowned. Sir, you had a major concussion. You were likely hallucinating. Was I? Alessandro opened his hand, clutched in his palm, stuck there by his own drying blood, was a small, round object. It was a cheap 2-inch button pin, the kind you get from a gumball machine or a tourist shop. It was a cartoon drawing of a grumpy-looking coffee bean with the words, "Don't talk to me before this." Leo's eyes widened. Where did you get this? She dropped it, Alessandro said. She was real. She saved my life. He stared at the pin. This stupid, cheap piece of plastic. It was the only clue. Find her, Alessandro commanded, his voice no longer the weak rasp of a patient, but the steel blade of the Salvatore boss. Leo hesitated. To thank her? Alessandro's dark eyes met his. To find her. No one sees me like that and just walks away. No one. I don't know if she's a threat, a loose end, or a guardian angel, but I'm going to find out. Check every coffee shop, every diner, every tourist trap within 10 blocks of that alley. Find the woman who wears this pin. And when we do, you bring her to me, unharmed. Alessandro's grip tightened, the edges of the pin digging into his palm. I owe her a debt, and the Salvatores always pay their debts, one way or another. For the next week, Clara Bennett lived in a self-made prison of anxiety. She worked her shifts at the morning grind on autopilot, her hands shaking so badly she spilled more coffee than she served. Every time a police car wailed in the distance, she jumped. Every time a man in a dark suit walked past the cafe window, her heart stopped. She'd seen the news. Alessandro Salvatore had not been reported injured. In fact, a society paper mentioned he was seen at an exclusive charity auction in Rome. It was a lie. She knew he was here, in the city, healing Or maybe he was dead, and she was the only person on Earth who knew how he died. She didn't know which was worse. She was scrubbing the espresso machine on a slow Tuesday afternoon, the cafe empty, save for an old man reading a newspaper in the corner. The bell on the door jingled. Clara didn't look up. "Be with you in a second," she called out, her voice muffled by the rag. "Take your time." The voice was low, rich, and smooth as velvet. It sent a chill straight down her spine that had nothing to do with the draft. She turned. He was standing in the middle of her cafe, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. It was him. Alessandro Salvatore. He was not the broken man from the alley. He was terrifying. He wore a black, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than her apartment. A pair of sunglasses rested on his head, pushing back his dark hair. The only sign of the attack was a faint, angry-looking scar that disappeared into his hairline and a slight shadow of a bruise under his left eye, expertly covered but not invisible. He was looking right at her. Not at the menu, not at the pastry case. At her, he knew. What can I get you?" Clara stammered, her hands gripping the wet rag. He took a slow step toward the counter, his eyes scanning her face, her uniform, her name tag. "Clara," he read aloud. It sounded less like a name and more like a verdict. "A black coffee," he said. She turned to make it, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She could feel his eyes on her back. She fumbled with the filter, spilling grounds on the counter. "Just a customer." "He's just a customer. He doesn't recognize you." It was dark. "You were a shadow." She finished pouring the coffee and slid it onto the counter, careful not to let her shaking hands show. "That'll be $3.50. He didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he placed something small on the counter and slid it toward her. It was her pin, the one with the grumpy coffee bean. Clara's blood ran cold. She stared at it, unable to breathe. "I believe this is yours," Alessandro said, his voice dangerously soft. She looked up, meeting his intense, dark gaze. There was no recognition in them, not of his savior, only the cold, appraising look of a predator. Where did you find this?" she whispered. "In an alley, near Veritas," he said. "It was a very bad night for a friend of mine. You see, this friend was attacked, left for dead. But someone helped him. Someone called 911. Someone stopped the bleeding. Was that you, Clara?" She couldn't speak. A nod was a confession. A denial was a lie he would see through. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The old man in the corner was oblivious. "Don't be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you. If I wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't be making me coffee." I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but her voice cracked. He smiled, but it was a cold, thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, you do. I saw your eyes. Just before I passed out. I've been seeing them every night since." So he did remember. This was it. She was going to be disappeared. I should have just walked away," she said, tears welling up in her eyes out of sheer terror. "I didn't see anything. I swear, I didn't want him. To die." Alessandro studied her for a long, silent moment. He saw her cheap, faded uniform. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes. He saw the defiant tilt of her chin. She wasn't a threat. She was just a girl. A girl who had done the one thing no one else in his entire life had ever done. She had helped him when he had nothing to offer. "Why?" he asked. It was the only question that mattered. Everyone else ran. Why didn't you? Clara finally met his gaze, a flash of her old, pre-debt self sparking to life. Because you were dying, she said, her voice shaking but firm. And no one deserves to die alone in an alley, bleeding on the concrete. I don't care who you are. His expression softened. The cold, appraising look was replaced by something else. Curiosity. Intrigue. You saved my life, Clara, he said, his voice now sincere. The Salvatore family pays its debts. Name your price. What do you want? Money? A new apartment? A new car? It's yours. Clara stared at him. Money. That's what it always came down to. He thought he could buy her silence, buy her act of kindness. The same terror that had paralyzed her moments ago, twisted into a cold, hard anger. I don't want your money, she spat, pushing the pin back toward him. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Now please, just take your coffee and leave. I don't want any trouble. Alessandro Salvatore, a man who could buy and sell entire city blocks, a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, was stunned into silence. He had expected a scavenger. He had found something else entirely. He pushed the pin back to her. Keep it. A reminder. Of what? That you're a bad liar, he said, and that you're in my debt. I'm in your debt? She scoffed, emboldened by disbelief. I saved your life. No, he said, picking up his coffee. You did. Which means I owe you. And in my world, Clara, owing someone is a liability. I don't like liabilities, but you refusing payment, that makes you one. He took a sip of the coffee. It's burnt. He placed a $100 bill on the counter. I will find a way to repay this debt, whether you like it or not. He turned and walked out, the bell jingling his departure. Clara sank onto a stool, her legs giving out. She had just survived a conversation with Alessandro Salvatore, but as she looked at the $100 bill and the stupid little pin, she had a terrible, sinking feeling that her life had just been saved, and also just been ruined. A week passed. Then two. Clara's life almost returned to normal, if normal meant living with a coiled knot of dread in her stomach. Every black car that slowed down, every man in a suit who glanced her way, she assumed it was him. But Alessandro Salvatore did not return to the cafe. She started to hope, tentatively, that he had meant what he said, that he'd accepted her refusal and left her alone. Then the envelope arrived. It wasn't mailed. It was slipped under her apartment door, a thick, cream-colored envelope with no return address. Her name, Clara Bennett, was written on the front in elegant, sharp calligraphy. Inside, there was no letter. There was only a single cashier's check. It was for $150,000. In the memo line, a single word was written. Paid. Clara's hands shook. This was more money than she had ever seen. It was enough for everything. It was enough to pay off the mountain of medical debt her mother had left behind, the debt that kept her chained to 2 jobs and a life she hated. But it felt dirty. It felt like blood money. She was furious. He had invaded her life, her cafe, and now her home. He had taken her one selfless act and put a price tag on it. She didn't know how, but she had to give it back. She couldn't go to his business. She didn't even know where it was. But she knew where he'd been that night. Veritas. That evening, she put the check in her pocket, put on her best and only coat, and walked to the restaurant. She didn't have a reservation. She stood outside, by the service alley, that alley, waiting. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew she couldn't keep the money. After an hour in the cold, a black sedan, so dark it seemed to drink the light, pulled up to the curb. Leo Moretti, the man with the professor's glasses, got out of the passenger side. He opened the back door. Alessandro Salvatore emerged. He was dressed for dinner, a dark grey suit and a silver tie. He looked every inch the powerful CEO the papers claimed he was. He saw her immediately. He didn't look surprised. He looked expectant. "Clara," he said, his voice neutral. Leo tensed, his hand moving inside his jacket. Alessandro raised a hand to stop him. Clara marched up to him, her fear eclipsed by her rage. She pulled the check from her pocket and shoved it against his chest. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I don't want your money." Alessandro didn't take the check. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the street lamps. "It's not a reward, Clara. It's a transaction. I owed you for my life. Now the books are balanced." "My life isn't a ledger," she cried, attracting the attention of the doorman. "You can't just balance the books. You think this makes it even? You think you can just throw money at the barista who saw you bleeding in a gutter and she'll disappear?" "Yes," he said simply. "That is generally how it works." "Well, I'm not generally," she was yelling now. "I won't be one of your problems that you pay to go away. I saved your life because you were a human being, not because you were a bank account. Take it back." He stared at her, this tiny, furious woman standing in the street, defying him. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same stubborn spark he'd seen in the alley. No one spoke to him this way. No one. They were either too scared or too obsequious. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger and far more dangerous. "You," he said, "are fascinating." He finally took the check from her hand. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Good," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "We're done." "No, we're not," he said, tucking the check into his inside pocket. "I paid a debt." "You refused. This means you have insulted me." Clara's stomach dropped. "Insulted you? In my world, refusing a gift, a payment, is a sign of disrespect. It implies the giver is unclean, that their money is not good enough." He took a step closer. She could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, like sandalwood and spice. "So now you owe me." That's ridiculous. That's insane." "That's business," he countered. "You've created a new debt, an insult, and you will have to repay it." "How?" she whispered, terrified again. "Have dinner with me." Clara blinked. Of all the things she expected, a threat, a warning, a dismissal, this was not it. "What?" "You've insulted me," he repeated, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You must make amends. Have dinner with me. Here. Tonight." I can't. I'm not dressed. I don't have a reservation." "You're with me?" he said, as if that explained everything. And, in this world, it did. "You don't need a reservation." He offered her his arm. Clara looked at his extended arm. It was a lifeline and a noose, all in one. She looked at the restaurant, a symbol of a world she would never belong to. And she looked at him, the most dangerous man she'd ever met. If she said no, what would happen? He had her address. He knew her name. He had just demonstrated he could find out her most private financial details. She was already in his world. She had stepped into it the moment she knelt in that alley. Running was no longer an option. "One dinner," she said, her voice small. "To clear this insult, and then you leave me alone. For good." "We'll see," he said. Trembling, Clara Bennett took the arm of Alessandro Salvatore. The doorman, who hadn't even looked at her moments before, scrambled to open the door, bowing his head. "Good evening, Mr. Salvatore. Your table is ready?" As she walked into the warm, golden light of the restaurant, leaving the cold alley behind, Clara felt the soft, velvet-lined steel of the trap snap shut around her. She was in the lion's den. But she hadn't been dragged. She had walked in. The dinner was a surreal experience. Clara, in her $30 coat and worn-out boots, sat across from Alessandro Salvatore in a private alcove at Veritas. Waiters, who looked like they moonlighted as assassins, treated her like royalty. They never made eye contact with her, only with Alessandro. "You're not eating," he observed, gesturing to her untouched plate of seared scallops. "I don't have much of an appetite," Clara said, her hands knotted in her lap. "You're afraid of me," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Shouldn't I be?" "Yes," he said honestly, "but not for the reasons you think. I will not harm you, Clara. You have my word. And my word is the only currency that matters." He was different than she'd expected. He wasn't a brute. He was intelligent, precise, and he listened, really listened, when she spoke. He asked her about her life, about her nursing school, about her mother. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone. He, in turn, spoke of his family. Not the family, but his actual family. His grandfather, who had come from Sicily with nothing. His father, who had built the shipping empire. He painted a picture of legacy, duty, and honor. It was seductive. He was seductive. He was showing her the man, not the monster. "But that night," she finally dared to ask, "the men who attacked you, you said Petrov." Alessandro's face hardened, the warmth vanishing like a snuffed candle. "Petrov is a Russian animal who doesn't understand boundaries. He moved on my territory. He will be dealt with." "And the rat," she whispered. "You said you were set up." His eyes bored into hers. "You don't miss a thing, do you?" He leaned forward. "Yes, there is a rat. Someone in my inner circle. Someone who knew my schedule, my route, the fact I would send my primary security detail ahead to the meeting. Someone I trusted. Who? If I knew that, they would already be in the East River," he said, with a chilling finality. "My consigliere, Leo, is investigating. He suspects everyone, as he should. This was her chance, her out. This is your world, Alessandro, not mine. I can't be a part of this." "You're already a part of it," he said softly. "You saved my life, and you've had dinner with me. In my world, that makes you mine to protect, whether you like it or not." "I don't need your protection." "Don't you?" he countered. "That cafe you work at, the manager, a man named Thomas, has been skimming from the register, and from your tips, and that apartment you live in. The landlord is planning to renovate and triple the rent, forcing you out. Your world is not as safe as you think." Clara was speechless. He had investigated her, thoroughly. "Don't worry," he said, taking a sip of wine. "Thomas will be fired by morning, for accounting errors. And your landlord has had a sudden change of heart. He will be offering you a new 5-year lease at your current rate." You can't just do that." "I just did. This is what I do, Clara. I fix things. I protect what is mine." She was trapped. This wasn't a cage of steel bars. It was a cage of golden protection, of solved problems. It was terrifying. The dinner ended. He walked her out. His black sedan was waiting. "Leah will take you home," he said. "And you?" "I have a meeting about the rat." He was about to get in a separate car when a man rushed out of the restaurant. He was balding, sweating, and carrying a briefcase. He looked like an accountant. "Mr. Salvatore, sir," he called out, skidding to a halt. "The quarterly reports. You forgot them. Leo asked me to—" Alessandro held up a hand, silencing him. "Riccardo, calm yourself. You're jumpy." "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. It's just, with the Petrov situation, everyone's on edge. Ricardo handed the briefcase to Leo, and in that moment, Clara saw it. It wasn't Ricardo. It was the man he was with. A tall, gaunt man in a dark suit had followed Ricardo out and was standing just inside the restaurant's doorway, trying to look inconspicuous. He had a long, jagged scar running down his left cheek, from his eye to his jaw. Clara gasped. Alessandro turned to her. "What is it?" "Him," she whispered, nodding toward the man in the doorway. "The scar. I've seen him before." Alessandro and Leo both went rigid. "Where?" Alessandro's voice was a blade. The night of the attack," Clara said, her mind racing, piecing it together. I get the old pastries from Veritas for the cafe sometimes. I was here earlier that evening, picking up a box from the kitchen. I saw that man in the alley." "He was one of Petrov's men?" Leo asked. "No, not then," Clara said, shaking her head. "It was hours before. He was talking to him." She pointed. Not at the man with the scar. She pointed at the sweating, terrified accountant. "He was talking to Ricardo," Clara said. "They were arguing. It was heated. I remember thinking it was strange. Ricardo gave him an envelope. And the man with the scar, he looked like he was threatening him." Silence. The entire street seemed to fall silent. Ricardo's face went white. He looked from Clara to Alessandro to the man in the doorway, who now realized he'd been made. Alessandro's face was carved from ice. He looked at his accountant, a man who had been with his family for 20 years. Ricardo. Ricardo dropped his briefcase. He turned and sprinted down the street. "Leo," Alessandro said quietly. Leo didn't hesitate. He was moving before Ricardo had taken a third step, tackling him to the pavement. The man with the scar tried to pull a weapon, but Alessandro was already on him, disarming him with a brutal, practiced efficiency that left the man breathless and clutching a broken wrist. It was over in 10 seconds. Alessandro straightened his tie. He looked down at Ricardo, who was weeping on the sidewalk, pinned by Leo. "So," Alessandro said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The rat." He turned and looked at Clara. She was pale, shaking, but she was holding his gaze. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't run. He realized with a sudden, startling clarity that she hadn't just saved his life. She had just saved his family. "Get in the car, Clara," he said. It wasn't a request. "Leo, bring Ricardo. We're going for a drive. And you," he snarled at the scarred man, "are going to tell me everything." The drive was the most terrifying 20 minutes of Clara's life. She sat in the back of the sedan, pressed against the plush leather. Alessandro sat beside her, perfectly still, radiating a cold fury that was more frightening than any yelling. Leo drove. In the passenger seat, Ricardo sobbed, his hands zip-tied behind his back. The scarred man, Petrov's soldier, was in a separate car behind them, a clean-up crew car. They didn't go to a police station. They went to a warehouse in the Red Hook shipping yards, a massive, dark building that smelled of salt and rust. The Salvatore name was painted on the side in faded letters. They were dragged inside. The warehouse was empty except for a single chair under a bare, hanging bulb. "Put him in the chair," Alessandro ordered. Leo and another man, who had appeared from the shadows, strapped Ricardo down. "Alessandro, please!" Ricardo begged, his face slick with tears and sweat. "Please, I had to. They had my son. They had pictures. They knew where he went to school." Alessandro stood in the shadows, just outside the circle of light. "You've been skimming from me for 5 years, Ricardo. Don't lie to me. Not now." Ricardo's sobs hitched. He was caught. It started small, just just to cover some bad investments. But it grew, and they found out. Petrov's people. They said they'd expose me to you, or I could give them something bigger, a way to forgive my debt to them. So you gave them me, Alessandro said, his voice flat. They were just supposed to rough you up, to scare you. Not that. I swear. You set me up to be murdered, Alessandro corrected him, and you let me hunt for a rat, pointing fingers at my most loyal men, while you sat in your office, counting my money. I'm sorry. Boss, please. Alessandro stepped into the light. His face was a mask of cold judgment. I am not a forgiving man, Riccardo. Clara, who had been shrinking by the door, couldn't stay silent. Alessandro, stop. He's pathetic. He's not a threat anymore. Let him go. Just let him go. Alessandro turned to her, his eyes unreadable. This is my world, Clara. This is what protection looks like. This is the fixing I do. You wanted to see the monster? Look. He turned back to Riccardo. You have dishonored my family. You have put us all at risk, and you have cost me time. What do we do with him, boss? Leo asked. Alessandro looked at the weeping man. He thought of the alley, of the feeling of his ribs cracking. Then he looked at Clara, her face pale with horror, but her eyes filled with pity. He sighed. The rage was still there, a hot coil in his gut, but her presence changed its chemical composition. You're a disgrace, Riccardo, Alessandro said, not a martyr. Leo, book him a one-way ticket to Argentina. Put him on a cargo ship tonight. He will leave with the clothes on his back, and he will never, ever set foot on this continent again. If I hear his name, if I see his face, I will finish this. Do you understand? Riccardo nodded, hyperventilating with relief. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, boss. Don't thank me, Alessandro cut him off. Thank her. She bought you a life you don't deserve. Leo nodded, cutting Riccardo free and hauling him to his feet. And Petrov's man? He, Alessandro said, his voice turning to gravel, will be our messenger. He's going to go back to Petrov and tell him exactly what happened. He's going to tell him that I know, and that I'm coming. An hour later, Alessandro walked Clara back to the car. The warehouse was quiet again. The problems had been handled. You should have been disgusted, he said, as the car started to move, leaving the dark docks behind. You should have run screaming. Clara was quiet for a long time, watching the city lights blur past the window. I was disgusted, she said, her voice barely a whisper. And I am terrified, but you let him go. Exile is not forgiveness, he said. It's not a bullet in the head, she countered. She turned to look at him. You showed mercy. Don't call it that, he snapped. It was a tactical decision. He's more useful as a ghost in South America than as a body in the harbor. It sends a different kind of message. Clara shook her head. You're lying. You did it for me. You didn't want me to see you do that. Alessandro didn't answer. He just stared out the window. They drove in silence, the chasm between their two worlds wider than ever. But at the same time, a strange, terrifying bridge was being built across it. When they reached her apartment, he got out and walked her to the door. The broken lock from his investigation had been replaced with a heavy-duty steel one. You're safe now, he said. The rat is gone, and Petrov will be too busy watching his back to worry about a barista. So this is it? She. The debt is paid? You'll leave me alone now? The words, which she had longed to hear, now tasted like ash in her mouth. Alessandro looked down at her. He saw the woman who had saved him, the woman who had unmasked his traitor, and the woman who had, in the span of a few hours, seen the very worst of him, and was still standing there. He reached out, his hand hesitating before his fingers gently brushed her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than polite formality. His touch was warm. "I can't," he whispered. You promised," she breathed. "I promised you dinner. I promised to repay my debt," he said, his eyes intense. "But I can't leave you alone, because, Clara, in all my life, you are the only person who has ever seen me. The real me. The one bleeding was the alley, and the one in the warehouse. And you're still here. I don't know what you want from me, Alessandro. I want you to be safe," he said. "But more than that, I just want you. I'm not a good man, Clara. I am everything you should run from. But I think you might be the only good thing I've ever found." He leaned in, his intent clear. This wasn't a request. It was a confession. "Tell me to go, Clara," he whispered, his lips an inch from hers. "Tell me to walk away, and I will. This is your last chance. Because if you don't, I will never let you go." Clara's heart was hammering. Her mind screamed, "Run." This was a killer. This was a monster. This was a life of darkness and fear. But she looked into his eyes, and she saw the man from the alley, the man she had refused to let die alone. She didn't tell him to go. She rose on her toes, and she kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and full of fear and anger and a terrifying, undeniable passion. It was the collision of two worlds. It was the acceptance of a fate she had sealed the moment she stepped forward. The next 6 months were a blur. Clara Bennett, the barista, ceased to exist. At first, Alessandro was true to his word. He protected her. He moved her into a penthouse apartment with bulletproof windows and a view of Central Park. He gave her a credit card with no limit. He surrounded her with security. It was a gilded cage, and Clara hated it. She wasn't a doll to be kept on a shelf. She was the woman who had walked into the alley. "I can't just sit here, Alessandro," she told him one night as he was dressing for another meeting. "I can't be this person, this kept woman." "You are not a kept woman," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "You are the woman I love." It was the first time he'd said it. It stopped her cold. "But you're keeping me from your life," she argued. "You go out, you fix things, you handle Petrov, and I stay here and order room service. I am not a pet, Alessandro. I was a nurse. I was smart." He turned to her, a rare smile on his face. "I know. You were smart enough to find the rat my entire organization missed." He walked over to her, taking her hands. "I have been fighting this, trying to keep you separate, trying to keep your light from my darkness. But you're right. It's not working. You're not meant to be hidden. You're meant to be seen." The next night, he didn't go to a meeting. He brought the meeting to him. He hosted a dinner. Not with businessmen, but with his capos, the 10 most powerful, dangerous men in his organization. They all filed in, respectful but curious, their eyes sliding to Clara, who stood at Alessandro's side in a simple, elegant black dress. "Gentlemen," Alessandro said, raising a glass of wine, "you all know what happened 6 months ago. You know I was betrayed. You know I was left for dead." The room was silent. "What you don't know," he continued, "is that I was not saved by our men. I was saved by this woman." He placed a hand on the small of Clara's back. The 10 capos stared at her. Their expressions changed from curiosity to a new, profound respect. "And when I was blind with rage, hunting for the rat among you, Alessandro said, his voice carrying. It was her eyes that saw the truth. It was her memory that unmasked Ricardo. She saved my life, and she saved this family. He held up his glass. Clara Bennett is not my mistress. She is my advisor. She is my most trusted counsel. She sees what we are too close to see. She has the word of the Salvatore family. You will show her the same respect you show me. You will treat her as the queen. Clara's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the real choice. He wasn't offering her a cage anymore. He was offering her a throne. She looked at the faces of the men staring at her. They were killers, criminals, and businessmen, and they were all raising their glasses to her. She had stepped into the alley to save a man. She had walked into the restaurant to defy a boss. And now she was standing beside a king, as his equal. Her old life was gone. The debt, the 2 jobs, the fear of the water-stained ceiling in her apartment. It was a different person's life. She picked up her own glass, her hand perfectly steady. She looked at Alessandro, who was watching her with an expression of pure, possessive pride. She was not the monster. He was not the man. They were something new, together. A balance of light and shadow. She was no longer Clara, the barista who saw something she shouldn't have. She was Clara Salvatore, the woman who had seen the Mafia boss at his weakest, and had not only stepped forward, she had stayed. And so the true story of Clara and Alessandro begins, not with a grand gesture, but with a single act of courage that changed everything. Clara didn't just pull Alessandro back from the edge of death. She rewrote the very fabric of his existence. Before her, his world was built on control, power, and fear, a fortress with walls too high for anyone to climb. But she walked straight through them, not because she was invincible, but because she understood what it meant to fight while bleeding, to stand tall while the world tried to break her. She taught him that real strength isn't about being untouchable, flawless, or ruthless. It's about what you do when you're broken, when your heart is heavy, and when darkness feels endless. And still, you choose to rise. In her quiet defiance, she became the light that exposed every shadow he'd ever hidden behind. And in doing so, she proved a timeless truth, that sometimes the most underestimated person in the room is the one silently holding all the cards. When everyone else faltered, she stepped forward with nothing but her conviction, and it was that courage that changed the course of both their lives. In return, he gave her more than gratitude or power. He gave her an empire, built not on fear, but on faith in the woman who taught him what true strength really means. What do you think of Clara's choice? Was it bravery, or was it the beginning of her own corruption? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you loved the drama and the twists, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. And as always, share this video with a friend who loves a story about dangerous choices and a love that breaks all the rules. Until next time,